always been a gadget guy. Whatever the latest tech is, I want it. So when Nurex released their advanced sleep monitoring headband, I pre-ordered immediately. It promised to track everything: REM cycles, dream patterns, even stress levels. During sleep, I've dealt with sleep paralysis since college. If you've never experienced it, count yourself lucky. You wake up mentally, but your body remains asleep. Can't move, can't speak. Sometimes accompanied by hallucinations or a feeling of a presence in the room. Doctors say it's harmless, just a hiccup in the sleep cycle, but it doesn't feel harmless when you're living it. The Nurex headband came with an app that visualized your brain activity throughout the night. After a week of use, I noticed something strange. During my paralysis episodes, which the device accurately identified, my brain waves showed an unusual pattern, perfect rhythmic oscillations that didn't match any normal sleep state. Out of curiosity, I exported the data and ran it through a frequency analyzer. What I found made no sense. The pattern matched radio wave frequencies, specifically a narrow band in the LF range between 7 and 8 Hertz. I'm an electrical engineer by training, so I built a simple receiver tuned to that frequency. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Then, during a particularly intense paralysis episode, the receiver picked up a signal. Weak, but definitely there. Using a directional antenna, I traced the signal to the northeast part of the city, the old industrial district, mostly abandoned now except for a few warehouses and the remains of the Coldwell Research Facility. Coldwell had been a government installation that closed in the early 90s. Official records said they did atmospheric research, but locals always suspected it was something more classified. I spent a few evenings driving around the area with my equipment, narrowing down the source. The signal was strongest near a nondescript building on the edge of the Coldwell complex, a small structure that looked like a maintenance shed. Online research into Coldwell yielded little until I found a declassified document mentioning Project Somnus, a Cold War initiative studying consciousness projection during sleep paralysis states. The document was heavily redacted, but mentioned signal guidance and cross-dimensional viewing. I broke into the shed on a Tuesday night. Inside, past a rusted door, I found a stairwell leading underground. The facility below was larger than I expected, a bunker with several rooms. Most were empty, stripped of equipment decades ago. The central room, I found what I was looking for, an old transmitter somehow still powered and sending out a signal on an automated cycle. The technology was ancient, but someone had added modern components, keeping it running. A logbook nearby contained entries dating back to 1983, describing experiments using sleep paralysis as a gateway for remote viewing. The scientists believed that during paralysis, consciousness could be partially detached from the body and guided to specific locations, even across dimensional boundaries, using precisely calibrated electromagnetic signals. The last official entry, dated November 1989, noted, "Project terminated following Incident 37B. Transmitter to be decommissioned and sealed." But there were newer entries handwritten on the margins, the most recent from just 3 months ago. Signal integrity maintained, increasing number of receptive subjects identified. The gateway remains open. I should have left then, should have reported it to someone. Instead, I did something incredibly stupid. I adjusted my headband to amplify the frequency, curious what would happen if I enhanced the connection during my next paralysis episode. That night, the paralysis hit harder than ever before, but this time I felt a pulling sensation, as if my mind was being drawn out through the top of my head. My perception shifted, tunneling forward at impossible speed until I found myself elsewhere. I was still in the bunker, but it wasn't abandoned. Equipment hummed, lights blazed, and people in lab coats moved about. Yet everything had a translucent, shimmering quality, like I was seeing it through rippling water. A scientist looked directly at me and smiled. "Another one," he said, though his lips didn't move. The words simply appeared in my mind. "We've been broadcasting for decades," the thought continued, "calling out across the barrier. So few can hear us." I tried to speak, but had no voice here. We Discovered something in 1989, he continued. Not remote viewing, remote existence. We found we could project not just consciousness, but transfer it entirely. We've been trapped here since the accident, broadcasting home, looking for vessels to return. I felt a tugging sensation as something tried to move through me, using me as a doorway. Your enhanced receiver works both ways, the thought came. Thank you for widening the path. With a desperate mental effort, I broke the paralysis, waking with a scream in my bedroom. My headband was smoking slightly, circuits fried. I destroyed the transmitter the next day, smashed it to pieces and scattered them. But the signal doesn't matter anymore. They found the frequency, they found me. Now during paralysis, I see them gathering around my bed, translucent figures waiting patiently. And sometimes when I check my sleep data, there are gaps, periods where the headband registers me as awake, but I have no memory of those hours. Last night I found mud on my shoes by the bed. The kind of mud that's only found near the old Coldwell facility. I think I've been going back there, but I'm not sure it's me doing the walking. Love the story? Show us with a like, hit that subscribe button, and share your scariest idea in the comments. And don't forget to tell us the time and where you're listening from. We want to know where the fear is spreading. Part 1. Relief. The first night I slept without terror was like being born again. I lay in bed next to Mark, swallowed the small blue pill with a sip of water, and waited for sleep to come. No rigid body, no crushing pressure on my chest, no shadowy figures looming at the edges of my vision. Just blessed, peaceful darkness and then morning. You look amazing, Mark said when I padded into the kitchen, following the scent of coffee. He was already dressed for work, his dark hair still damp from the shower. How do you feel? Human, I replied, accepting the mug he offered. Completely, wonderfully human. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in that way I loved. No episodes? None. I slept straight through. I took a sip of coffee, savoring both the rich taste and the absence of the bone-deep exhaustion I'd carried for years. Dr. Whitman was right. Somnolex is a miracle drug. I'm so happy for you, Ellie. Mark kissed my forehead. Maybe we can finally get back to normal. Normal. The word resonated through me like a struck bell. Normal sleep. Normal life. Normal marriage. The sleep paralysis had started 3 years ago, shortly after we moved into our new house. At first, the episodes were infrequent. Once a month, then once a week. I'd wake unable to move, unable to speak, while my mind screamed, in panic. Sometimes I'd sense a presence in the room watching me. Other times I'd see shadowy figures moving at the edges of my vision, approaching the bed with terrible purpose. Mark had been supportive at first, holding me when I finally broke, free of the paralysis, listening patiently to my tearful descriptions of what I'd experienced. But as the episodes increased in frequency and intensity, his patience had frayed. How could it not? His sleep was constantly interrupted by my gasping awakenings, his workdays compromised by exhaustion. Our intimacy had withered. Who could feel romantic when every night brought the possibility of terror? We'd tried everything. Sleep studies, which showed unusual brain activity during my episodes but offered no solutions. Meditation and relaxation techniques, adjusting the bedroom temperature, eliminating caffeine, establishing rigid sleep schedules. Nothing worked. Then, Dr. Whitman had mentioned Somnolex, a new medication specifically developed for sleep paralysis. It works differently than traditional sleep aids, she'd explained. Rather than simply sedating you, it modifies the transition between sleep stages to prevent the dissociation between mind and body that causes paralysis episodes. One little pill, and the nightmare was over. I have that presentation this morning, Mark said, glancing at his watch. But I should be home by 6. Dinner out to celebrate your first night of decent sleep in years? That sounds perfect. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. Good luck with the presentation. After he left, I moved through my morning routine with newfound energy. The persistent brain fog that had accompanied my chronic sleep deprivation was gone. Colors seemed brighter, sounds clearer. I felt present, in my body in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. That evening over dinner, Mark watched me with a mixture of relief and lingering concern. "You're sure you feel okay? No side effects from the medication?" "None," I assured him, twirling pasta around my fork. "Dr. Whitman said it might cause vivid dreams, but I didn't dream at all. Or if I did, I don't remember them." "That's great." He reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I've missed you, Ellie." I knew what he meant. I'd been physically present but mentally absent for so long, consumed by fear of the night and exhaustion during the day. "I've missed me too," I said softly. That night I took my second pill with the same sense of gratitude as the first. Mark watched from his side of the bed, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "What?" I asked, settling back against the pillows. "Nothing." He shook his head slightly. "Just, I hope this really is the answer." "It is," I said with conviction. "I can feel it." He nodded and turned out the light. In the darkness, I felt his hand find mine, squeezing gently before releasing. Within minutes, I drifted into dreamless sleep. By the end of the first week on Somnolex, I felt reborn. My energy had returned, my mood had improved, and for the first time in years, I didn't fear bedtime. Dr. Whitman had been right. The medication was life-changing. The only peculiarity was how deeply I slept. Mark said he'd tried to wake me one night when a thunderstorm rattled the windows, but I hadn't stirred even when he shook my shoulder. "You were out cold," he'd said the next morning, like unnaturally still. "Is that bad?" I'd asked, suddenly concerned. No, he'd quickly reassured me. "Just different. I'm used to you being such a light sleeper." It was true. Before the paralysis began, the slightest noise would wake me. During the worst of the episodes, I'd existed in a state of hypervigilance. My body tensed for the next attack, even in sleep. Now I slept like the dead. The phrase came to me unbidden one morning as I made coffee, and I shivered despite the warm kitchen. Like the dead. An odd comparison, but accurate. I slept without moving, without dreaming, without any awareness of the world around me until morning came. But wasn't that normal? Wasn't that what sleep was supposed to be? I pushed the thought aside and focused on the positive changes. I was functioning better at work, more present in my relationships, more patient with everyday frustrations. Mark and I were reconnecting, our conversations extending beyond my sleep problems for the first time in years. We'd even started making love again, tentatively at first, then with growing passion as my energy returned. Everything was better. Everything except the strange, nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. It started with small things. Items in the house moved from where I'd left them. My favorite mug in the wrong cabinet. My book on the coffee table when I was certain I'd left it on the nightstand. My phone fully charged when I knew I'd forgotten to plug it in. "Did you move my reading glasses?" I asked Mark one evening, searching the living room. He looked up from his laptop. "No, why would I? They're not where I left them." He shrugged. "You probably just forgot where you put them. You were pretty tired last night." "I wasn't tired," I protested. "That's the whole point of the medication." Mark's expression shifted subtly. "Right, of course. Well, I didn't move them. I found the glasses eventually in the bathroom where I never took them. Had I been there before bed and forgotten? It seemed unlikely, but more plausible than any alternative. Then there were the mornings when Mark seemed different, subdued, distracted, watching me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Is everything okay?" I asked one such morning, catching his gaze following me across the kitchen. "Fine," he said quickly. "Just thinking about work stuff." But his eyes held something I couldn't quite identify. Concern? Curiosity? Something else? Entirely? The strangest incident occurred about 2 weeks after I started Somnolex. I woke to find a small bruise on my wrist, a perfect circle of purplish blue against my pale skin. "How did you get that?" Mark asked at breakfast, his tone casual, but his eyes fixed on the mark. I have no idea, I admitted. I must have bumped into something yesterday. Must have, he agreed, returning to his coffee. But I had no memory of any impact that could have caused such a distinct bruise. It was as if it had appeared while I slept, which was impossible unless... Mark, do I move around in my sleep? Since starting the medication, I mean. He looked up, surprised by the question. No, not at all. You're completely still. Why? Just wondering about this bruise. He studied me for a moment. Maybe you should mention it to Dr. Whitman. Could be a side effect they don't know about yet. Maybe. I agreed, though it seemed unlikely that a sleep medication could cause bruising. That night I was more aware of Mark's presence beside me in bed. He seemed restless, shifting position frequently, sighing into the darkness. When I asked if he was okay, he murmured something about work stress and suggested I take my pill. I did, and as usual, sleep came quickly and completely. But in the morning I woke with a strange sensation, the feeling that I'd been watched all night. Did you get up a lot last night? I asked Mark over breakfast. Once or twice, he said vaguely. Why? No reason. I just had a weird feeling when I woke up. His eyes met mine briefly, then slid away. Probably just adjusting to normal sleep again. Your body's not used to it. Probably, I agreed, but the uneasy feeling persisted throughout the day. That evening, I called Dr. Whitman's office to report the bruise and ask about the unusual depth of my sleep. Those aren't known side effects, the nurse said after consulting my chart. But everyone responds differently to medication. Are you experiencing any other symptoms? Headaches, nausea, dizziness? No, nothing like that. I feel great during the day. It's just, I sleep so deeply that nothing wakes me. And I found this unexplained bruise. The deep sleep is actually a positive sign that the medication is working effectively, she assured me. As for the bruise, unless you develop more of them, it's probably unrelated. But Dr. Whitman can see you next week if you're concerned. I made the appointment, more to ease my growing unease than out of any real medical concern. The bruise was already fading, and the benefits of Somnolex far outweighed these minor peculiarities. Or so I told myself. Part 2. Suspicion. The camera was Mark's idea, though not in the way he intended. We were watching a home renovation show when a segment featured a couple installing security cameras. We should get those, Mark said suddenly, for when we're traveling. We hardly ever travel, I pointed out, and the neighborhood is pretty safe. Still, it would be good to have. Peace of mind. Something in his tone caught my attention. Are you worried about something specific? No. He shook his head quickly. Just thinking ahead. The next day, a package arrived. A set of small wireless security cameras with night vision capability. Mark installed one in the living room and another in the hallway, angled toward the front door. Don't you want one for the bedroom? I asked, remembering how the couple in the TV show had placed cameras throughout their house. No need, he said firmly. That's our private space. His response struck me as odd. Mark had never been particularly concerned about privacy before. If anything, he was the more exhibitionist of the two of us, often forgetting to close blinds or bathroom doors. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, listening to Mark's breathing beside me. It had been 3 weeks since I started Somnolex, 3 weeks of blessed relief from the paralysis that had tormented me. Yet instead of feeling grateful, I found myself increasingly uneasy. Why had Mark suddenly wanted security cameras? Why was he so adamant about not having one in our bedroom? Why did he sometimes watch me with that strange, unreadable expression? And why, despite sleeping better than I had in years, did I sometimes wake feeling as if I hadn't rested at all? The question circled in my mind until the Somnolex finally pulled me under, into the familiar, complete darkness. I woke to sunlight and an empty bed. Mark had an early meeting, his note on the kitchen counter explained. He'd be home late. Don't. Wait up. The day stretched before me, empty of obligations. I'd taken time off work while adjusting to the medication, and though I felt well enough to return, I decided to use the full 2 weeks Dr. Whitman had recommended. I wandered the house restlessly, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. In the spare room, I found the box the security cameras had come in. 4 cameras according to the packaging. Mark had installed only 2. Where were the others? I searched his home office first, then the garage. No cameras. But in the back of his desk drawer, I found a small device I didn't recognize. A portable monitor with a built-in screen, the kind used to view security camera feeds remotely. Why would Mark need this when the camera's connected directly to our phones? I turned it on. The screen lit up, showing the living room from the camera's perspective. I swiped right. The hallway appeared. Another swipe, and I froze. Our bedroom. The camera angle captured our entire bed, positioned discreetly on the bookshelf, opposite. A 4th swipe showed the ensuite bathroom. Mark had installed cameras in our private space after all, and he hadn't told me. My hands trembled as I set the monitor down. Why would he lie? Why would he secretly record our bedroom? The obvious, ugly answer rose in my mind. He suspected me of something. Perhaps he thought I was faking my improvement, or worse, that I was unfaithful during the day while he worked. But that made no sense. Mark knew my schedule, knew I'd barely had energy to function before Somnilex, let alone conduct an affair. And our relationship had improved dramatically since I started the medication. Unless a new, more disturbing possibility emerged. What if Mark was recording me while I slept? What if there was something happening during those unnaturally deep, dreamless nights that he wanted to document? Picked up the monitor again, fingers trembling as I navigated to the settings menu. The cameras recorded motion events automatically, storing footage for 7 days before overwriting it. There were dozens of clips from the bedroom camera. I selected the most recent from last night. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. The footage began, with Mark sitting up in bed looking down at my sleeping form. He reached for something on his nightstand, his phone, and checked it before setting it down again. Then he turned toward me, watching intently for several seconds. In the grainy night vision footage, I could see myself lying perfectly still, unnaturally still, just as Mark had described. But what happened next sent ice through my veins. Mark leaned over me, waving his hand in front of my face. When I didn't respond, he pinched my arm, hard enough that I should have woken instantly. But I didn't move, not even a flinch. Then he sat back, still watching me. His lips moved as if he was speaking, but the camera had no audio. He seemed to be waiting for something. After about a minute, he nodded slightly and shifted his gaze to the empty space beside me on the bed. He continued speaking, occasionally gesturing as if in conversation with someone I couldn't see. I fast-forwarded through 10 minutes of this one-sided interaction before Mark finally lay down again, turning, his back to both me and the empty space he'd been addressing. My hands shook as I selected another clip from 2 nights ago. The pattern was the same, Mark checking that I was deeply asleep, then apparently conversing with an empty space beside me. Clip after clip showed the same scenario, with minor variations. Sometimes Mark seemed agitated, pacing beside the bed. Other times he appeared calm, almost reverential. But always he was speaking to something invisible next to my motionless body. Was my husband having conversations with an empty room while I slept? Was he hallucinating? I set the monitor down and pressed my hands against my eyes, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe Mark was on the phone with someone, using earbuds the camera couldn't detect. Maybe he was practicing presentations for work. Maybe he talked in his sleep, acting out conversations from his dreams. But none of those explanations accounted for the way he checked that I was deeply unconscious before beginning these one-sided conversations, or the way he'd focused so intently on the empty space beside me. I needed to see more. I needed to hear what he was saying. With shaking hands, I retrieved my old phone from the drawer where I'd stored it after upgrading. The battery was dead, but it charged quickly enough. I installed the security camera app and logged in with the account information I found on Mark's monitor. Then I positioned the phone on my nightstand, angled to capture both the bed and the surrounding space, and set it to record audio as well as video. That night I hesitated before taking my Somnulex. What if I skipped the medication? Would I experience paralysis again? Would I see whatever Mark was apparently seeing and speaking to? But the memory of that terror, the crushing weight on my chest, the shadowy figures approaching the bed, the absolute helplessness, was too vivid. I couldn't voluntarily return to that nightmare, not even to solve this mystery. I swallowed the pill and lay down, acutely aware of Mark reading beside me, of the hidden camera on the bookshelf, of my phone recording on the nightstand. "Good night," Mark said, turning off his reading light. "Good night," I replied and closed my eyes, waiting for the familiar, complete darkness to claim me. Part 3. Revelation. I woke to sunlight and the disorienting awareness that something was wrong. Mark's side of the bed was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. He'd left early again, though I had no memory of him getting up. My phone sat on the nightstand where I'd left it, the recording app showing it had captured over 7 hours of footage. With trembling fingers, I disconnected it from the charger and opened the video. The first hours were uneventful, just Mark and me sleeping peacefully side by side. I fast-forwarded until I saw movement. Mark sitting up at 2:43 a.m., checking his phone as he had in the previous recordings. This time I could hear him. "It's time," he whispered, though whether to himself or someone else wasn't clear. He turned to look at me, then performed the same check as before, waving his hand in front of my face, pinching my arm. I didn't stir. "She's under," he said louder. "Now. You can come." My blood froze. Who was he talking to? The room appeared empty except for the two of us. Mark waited, watching the space beside the bed expectantly. After about 30 seconds, his expression changed to one of recognition. "Yes, she's responding well to the medication," he said, as if answering a question. "No more awareness during the episodes." Episodes? Was he talking about my sleep paralysis? "The key. Doctor says she should stay on it indefinitely," Mark continued. "No reason to stop if it's working." A pause, as if listening. "No, she doesn't suspect anything. She thinks the medication has stopped the paralysis completely." Another pause. "I understand your concern, but I've been careful. The bruise was unfortunate, but she didn't connect it to anything important." The bruise. The circular mark on my wrist that I couldn't explain. Mark knew how it had happened. "Yes, I'm monitoring for side effects, but so far there aren't any beyond the deep sleep, which works in our favor." In our favor? Who was our? Mark shifted position, leaning forward slightly. "How much longer will this continue?" "It's been 3 weeks." He listened, his expression growing troubled. "That wasn't our agreement. You said once she was properly medicated, you'd move on to someone else." "Move on? Agreement? What agreement had Mark made, and with whom?" "I understand she's an ideal subject, but this is affecting our relationship. She senses something's wrong, even if she doesn't know what." "Subject?" The word sent a chill through me. Was I some kind of experiment? "No, I haven't told her anything about you or the others. She thinks the paralysis was a sleep disorder." "The others?" There were others involved in whatever this was? Mark's next words confirmed my growing horror. "Look, I agreed to help you study sleep paralysis subjects because you said you needed to understand how human consciousness perceives your kind during the transition states. I gave you access to Ellie when she was aware during paralysis. Now, the medication has stopped her awareness, but you're still, what? Feeding? Experimenting? What exactly are you doing to her?" "Feeding?" My stomach lurched. What the hell was Mark talking about? His face changed again, this time to something like fear. "I'm not threatening to expose you. I'm just asking for clarity on how long this will continue." A longer pause, during which Mark's expression grew, increasingly distressed. "That wasn't part of our deal. You said you'd leave her alone once she couldn't perceive you anymore." Another pause. "What do you mean, more interesting this way?" She's not conscious during your visits. Visit? Something was visiting me while I slept? I don't understand. If she can't perceive you, what value does this have for your research? Research? I was being researched by something Mark could see, but I couldn't. Her body still experiences paralysis, even with the medication? Mark sounded genuinely surprised. She has no awareness of it. My body still experienced paralysis. The medication hadn't stopped the phenomenon, it had only stopped my awareness of it. So the medication just, what? Separates her consciousness from the experience, keeps her mind asleep while her body goes through the paralysis? That explained the unnatural stillness, the inability to be woken. I wasn't simply sleeping deeply, I was paralyzed but unaware of it. And you prefer this? Having access without her fear response? Mark's voice had taken on a clinical tone that I'd never heard from him before. That's why you wanted her medicated. Another pause. I see. Her fear was contaminating the experience for you, making it harder to connect properly. Connect? Connect how? And now that she's unaware, you can fully access her, what did you call it? Her liminal consciousness? The part that exists between sleeping and waking? Liminal consciousness. The term sent another wave of nausea through me. Whatever was happening to me while I slept unconscious, it involved some part of my mind being accessed by something. How many others are you studying this way? Mark asked. He listened, then nodded slowly. And they all have sleep paralysis? Or had it before medication? Another nod. So people who experience sleep paralysis are actually perceiving your presence during the transition states? The medication doesn't stop you from accessing them, it just stops them from being aware of it. The pieces were falling into place, each one more horrifying than the last. The sleep paralysis hadn't been a disorder. It had been my consciousness, perceiving something real, something that visited during specific sleep states, something that preferred I not be aware of its presence. And what exactly do you gain from this access? Mark asked, his tone hardening slightly. A longer pause. Energy? You feed on some kind of energy produced during these states? Feed. The word echoed in my mind, conjuring images of parasites, of vampiric entities sustaining themselves on human consciousness. And it's more efficient when the subject isn't aware and fighting against the experience? Mark listened, again, then sighed. I understand, but we had an agreement. 3 weeks of uninterrupted access, then you'd move on. Another pause. No, I'm not backing out. I'm simply holding you to our original terms. Mark's expression changed suddenly to one of alarm. What do you mean she's special? Special how? He listened, growing visibly pale. That's not possible. The medication completely suppresses her awareness during the episodes. Another pause. She's recording memories without conscious awareness? How is that possible? Recording memories? Was some part of me aware of these visitations despite the medication? And you can access these stored memories? Read them like files? Mark ran a hand through his hair, clearly distressed. This goes beyond our agreement. You said nothing about memory access or storage. He listened again, his expression hardening. No, this ends now. Tonight is the last time. Find another subject. Mark's tone had become commanding, authoritative in a way I'd never heard from him. But his next reaction suggested his authority meant little to whatever he was addressing. He recoiled slightly, as if from an unpleasant sensation. Don't. There's no need for threats. Another pause, longer this time. I understand you have certain capabilities, but remember I've documented our interactions. If anything happens to either of us, that documentation goes public. He was threatening whatever entity he was speaking to, and apparently he had evidence of its existence. 1 more week, Mark said finally, his voice tight. Then you move on, permanently, and you do not access her stored memories again. Those are private. He listened, then nodded curtly. Agreed. Now, I think we're done for tonight. Mark lay back down, turning away from both me and the empty space he'd been addressing. But from the tension in his shoulders, I could tell he wasn't sleeping. The recording continued for several more hours, showing nothing but our still forms in the bed. Mark rigid with what I now recognized as fear, me unnaturally motionless in my medicated, unaware paralysis. I stopped the video, my mind reeling with implications. Sleep paralysis wasn't a disorder. It was a perception, an awareness of something real that visited during specific sleep states. The Somnolex hadn't cured anything. It had simply removed my ability to perceive these visitations while they continued unimpeded, and Mark had known. Had facilitated it. Had made some kind of agreement with whatever entities were involved. For what? Research? Money? Or something else entirely? I checked the time. 10:17 a.m. Mark wouldn't be home until evening. I had hours to decide what to do. With this horrifying knowledge, first I needed to understand more about what was happening to me. I opened my laptop and searched for information on sleep paralysis. Not the medical explanations I'd already exhausted, but alternative interpretations. What I found sent chills through me. Across cultures and throughout history, sleep paralysis had been associated with visitations by supernatural entities. In Newfoundland, the old hag who sat on sleepers' chests. In Japan, the kanashibari experience of being bound by invisible forces. Sleep demons, night hags, incubi, succubi, different names for what many believed was the same phenomenon. Entities that fed on human energy during vulnerable sleep states. Modern science dismissed these interpretations as cultural frameworks for explaining a neurological event. But what if the cultural interpretations were right? What if these entities were real, and the neurological explanation was simply our limited understanding of a more complex phenomenon? Mark had spoken of research and subjects. Was he working with these entities, helping them find people with sleep paralysis? People like me who could perceive them during the transition states. And the medication, had it been prescribed specifically to facilitate these visitations without my awareness or resistance? I searched for information on Somnolex. The medication was indeed new, approved just 6 months ago specifically for sleep paralysis. Its mechanism of action was described as modifying the transition between sleep stages to prevent dissociation between mind and body. But what if that wasn't what it did at all? What if it simply severed the connection between my conscious awareness and my body during these episodes, allowing the entity's unimpeded access? I needed to know if Dr. Whitman was involved. Had she knowingly prescribed a medication that would make me more vulnerable to these visitations? I called her office asking for an urgent appointment. To my surprise, they offered a slot that afternoon. Either they had a cancellation, or my case was considered a priority. Before leaving for the appointment, I made copies of the video recordings and stored them in multiple locations. My email, a cloud drive, a USB stick I hid in my car. If Mark had been telling the truth about having documentation, I needed my own evidence as insurance. I also made one more critical decision. I didn't take my morning dose of Somnolex. If these entities visited during sleep paralysis episodes, I wanted to be aware if it happened again. The terror of paralysis was preferable to being unknowingly violated by whatever was accessing my liminal consciousness while I slept unaware. First and under confrontation, Dr. Whitman's office was exactly as I remembered it. Soothing, neutral tones, comfortable furniture, certificates displayed discreetly on the walls. She greeted me with professional warmth, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Ellie, good to see you. The nurse mentioned you're experiencing some concerns about Somnolex." I studied her carefully, looking for any sign that she was complicit in what was happening to me. Her expression remained open, concerned, apparently genuine. "Yes," I said cautiously. "I've been experiencing some unusual effects, such as extremely deep sleep. Nothing wakes me. Not loud noises, not physical contact. I sleep without moving at all." She nodded, making a note. "That's not uncommon with Somnolex. The medication creates a very stable sleep state. which is why it's so effective for sleep paralysis. Any other concerns? I found an unexplained bruise on my wrist, and I sometimes wake feeling watched. Dr. Whitman's expression didn't change, but she set down her pen. Interesting. The bruise could be unrelated, of course, but the feeling of being watched is worth exploring. She leaned forward slightly. Ellie, have you ever experienced hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations apart from your sleep paralysis episodes? You mean like seeing or hearing things while falling asleep or waking up? No, only during the paralysis. And you haven't experienced paralysis since starting Somnolex? I hesitated. Not that I'm aware of. She caught the qualification. Not that you're aware of. Do you believe you might be experiencing paralysis without conscious awareness? This was the moment to decide how much to reveal. If Dr. Whitman was involved in whatever Mark was doing, telling her my suspicions could be dangerous. But if she wasn't, if she was simply a doctor who had prescribed a medication without knowing its true effects, she might be able to help. I decided on a middle path. I've been sleeping so deeply that I wondered if the paralysis might still be occurring physiologically, even if I'm not consciously experiencing it. Dr. Whitman looked thoughtful. That's an insightful question. Somnolex works by modifying the transition between REM and waking states, which is when sleep paralysis typically occurs. In theory, it prevents the dissociation that allows consciousness, while the body remains in REM atonia, the natural paralysis that keeps us from acting out our dreams. But what if it doesn't prevent the dissociation? I pressed. What if it just prevents awareness of it? She studied me with new interest. That's not how the medication is understood to work, but sleep science is still evolving. Why do you ask? Have you observed something that suggests the paralysis is still occurring? I took a calculated risk. My husband says I sleep unnaturally still, and I found a video online of someone on Somnolex who appeared to be in a paralyzed state, despite being unaware of it. This wasn't entirely a lie. I had found such a video after searching specifically for it this morning, though it was from an unverified source and could have been faked. Dr. Whitman frowned. I haven't heard of such cases, but it's theoretically possible. The medication's primary function is to prevent the conscious awareness of paralysis, which is what causes the distress. If the physiological state still occurred without the awareness, well, that wouldn't necessarily be considered a problem from a treatment perspective. Wouldn't be considered a problem, I repeated, unable to keep the edge from my voice. What if something was happening during that paralysis that the patient should be aware of? She looked confused. Such as, I don't know, sleepwalking, sleep apnea, or, I hesitated, then decided to push further. Or some kind of presence that's normally perceived during paralysis episodes. Dr. Whitman's expression shifted to one of professional concern. Ellie, the presences perceived during sleep paralysis are hallucinations caused by the brain's attempt to make sense of the dissociated state. They aren't real entities. Are you certain of that? I challenged. Has science definitively proven that nothing external is involved in sleep paralysis? She sighed, her expression softening. This is a common concern among sleep paralysis sufferers. The experiences feel so real, so consistent across cultures, that it's natural to wonder if something external is occurring. But all the evidence points to a neurological explanation. What if the evidence is incomplete? What if these entities are real, and the medication simply removes our ability to perceive them while they continue to interact with us? Dr. Whitman leaned back, studying me with what appeared to be genuine concern. Ellie, these thoughts suggest you might be experiencing some anxiety or possibly paranoid ideation as a side effect of the medication. It's rare, but not unheard of. I think we should consider switching you to an alternative treatment. She wasn't going to engage with my theory. Either she truly believed the conventional explanation, or she was very good at maintaining her cover. I'd like to stop the medication, I said firmly. I think that's wise, given these concerns. However, I don't recommend stopping abruptly. Let's taper you off over the next week to avoid any rebound effects. What kind of rebound effects? Intensified sleep paralysis episodes primarily. Love the story? Show us with a like, hit that subscribe button, and share your scariest idea in the comments. And don't forget to tell us the time and where you're listening from. We want to know where the fear is spreading. My sister Ellie and I came into this world together 7 minutes apart. Being identical twins has always meant sharing everything. Clothes, friends, even our thoughts sometimes. We'd finish each other's sentences, feel each other's pain, know when the other was in trouble. But what happened last October took our connection to a place I never could have imagined. Ellie was driving home from a late shift when a truck ran a red light. The doctor said she was clinically dead for almost 2 minutes before they brought her back. She spent 3 days in a coma while I sat by her bed, holding her hand, feeling half dead myself. When she finally woke up, everything seemed normal. At first, the doctors called her recovery miraculous. No brain damage, no lasting physical effects. But the night terrors started almost immediately. "I can't move, Abby," she told me after the first episode. "I wake up completely frozen, and there's someone in the room with me. Sometimes several of them." Sleep paralysis, the doctors called it. Common after trauma. Nothing to worry about. But I knew it was more than that. Because while Ellie was experiencing paralysis in her sleep, I started seeing things while wide awake. The first time it happened, I was making coffee in my kitchen. The air in the corner of the room suddenly seemed to thicken, like heat rising from pavement. Then a figure took shape, tall and thin, with limbs that bent at odd angles. It stood watching me for several seconds before dissolving. I called Ellie, immediately. "I just had another episode," she said before I could speak. There was a tall one this time. It just stood there staring. My blood ran cold. "What time exactly?" "Just now. Maybe 2 minutes ago." The same moment I had seen it in my kitchen. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern. Ellie would experience sleep paralysis, unable to move, while I, fully awake, would see the entities she described. Sometimes they noticed me watching. They would turn their featureless faces toward me, tilt their heads in curiosity. We started documenting everything. Ellie kept a sleep journal, noting the time and details of each episode. I recorded when and where I saw the entities. The correlation was perfect. Every single time matched. Our research led us to quantum entanglement, the theory that particles that interact with each other become permanently connected, with the state of one instantly influencing the other regardless of distance. Some scientists theorize that identical twins might share a form of biological entanglement. "We're connected on a quantum level," Ellie said. "When these things visit me during sleep paralysis, you can see them because of our connection." But that didn't explain why this started only after her accident. We decided to visit our grandmother, our father's mother. At 92, she was the oldest living member of our family and the keeper of its history. We'd always been close to her, but there were subjects she never discussed, like what happened to our father's twin brother who died as a child. "You girls shouldn't be asking about such things," she said when we brought it up. But something, in her eyes, fear, recognition, told me she knew more than she was saying. "Grandma, please," I said. "Ellie's health might depend on it." She stared at us for a long moment, then sighed deeply. "It wasn't just your father who had a twin," she finally said. "There have been twins in this family for generations, always identical. Always one boy and one girl pair in each generation." She went to an old trunk and pulled out a family Bible. Between its pages were family trees dating back to the 1800s. Sure enough, each generation showed a set of twins, and in every case, one twin died young. "It's the family curse," she whispered. "They called it the pairing in the old country. According to family legend, our ancestor Magdalena Voss made a deal with something ancient in the Black Forest of Germany. Unable to have children, she promised the entity the life of one child from each generation in exchange for fertility. But entities are clever with their wording. She was granted twins in each generation, with one always claimed as payment. The why? Twins are born connected to each other and to the other side, Grandma explained. One serves as the anchor, the other as the gateway. But both my parents are still alive, I pointed out. Your father's twin didn't die by accident, she said quietly. My husband, he found a way to break the pattern. He performed a ritual to sever the connection between your father and his brother. It worked, but at a terrible cost. Your uncle was left with no protection from what came through. I felt sick. So when Ellie died temporarily, the old connection was reestablished, Grandma nodded. Death, even temporary, thins the veil. Now you're both fulfilling the roles set by the curse. Ellie as the anchor, frozen in place during sleep paralysis. You as the gateway, seeing into their world while awake. How do we stop it? Ellie asked. Grandma shook her head. Your grandfather took that knowledge to his grave. He never wanted anyone to attempt it again after what happened to your uncle. We left our grandmother's house with more questions than answers, but at least we understood what was happening to us. Over the next few weeks, the episodes intensified. Ellie's paralysis lasted longer, and the entities I saw became more substantial. Sometimes they could move objects in our world, knocking over a glass or turning pages in a book. We scoured occult bookstores, online forums, and academic papers on paranormal phenomena. Finally, in a dissertation about Germanic folklore, we found a reference to Magdalena Voss and her bargain. The paper included fragments of the ritual our grandfather had performed. It was dangerous. The ritual required both twins to enter a state between worlds, risking complete separation from their bodies. But it offered a chance to rewrite the terms of the ancient bargain. We gathered the necessary items: black candles, salt, herbs mentioned in the text. We chose the night of the winter solstice, when the boundary between worlds was naturally thinner. As midnight approached, we sat facing each other in a circle of salt. The ritual required Ellie to voluntarily enter sleep paralysis while I remained awake but in a meditative state. I'm scared, Abby, Ellie whispered as we began. Me too, I admitted. But we're doing this together. Ellie lay down in the center of the circle while I sat at her head, our hands connected. She took the sleeping draft we'd prepared and closed her eyes. 20 minutes later, her breathing changed. Her eyes moved rapidly beneath her lids. She was in REM sleep, the state where paralysis occurs. I'm here, she whispered, her lips barely moving. I can see them coming. I closed my eyes, focusing on our connection. Gradually, I began to see what she saw, our living room, but overlaid with a strange shifting landscape. Entities moved toward us from all directions, drawn by the ritual. Following the text, I began to recite the words that would temporarily strengthen our connection, rather than sever it. The entities sensed what we were doing and moved faster. They're trying to stop us. Ellie's voice came, strained and distant. I continued the incantation, feeling the connection between us grow stronger. Through Ellie's paralyzed state, I could now fully perceive the other side, a dimension that existed alongside ours, separated by the thinnest of veils. At the center of this realm stood an ancient tree, its bark black as night, branches reaching like grasping hands. This was the heart of the bargain, the entity Magdalena had dealt with centuries ago. Together, Ellie and I approached it in our shared vision. The entities tried to block our path, but our combined will pushed them aside. We've come to renegotiate, I said to the tree. Its branches shuddered. A voice like rustling leaves filled our minds. The bargain is eternal. One twin must always serve. The terms were never fair, Ellie's voice rang out. We offer a new arrangement. We proposed a new bargain. Neither of us would be taken, but we would maintain the connection, serving as conscious intermediaries rather than unwilling gateways. We would acknowledge the entity's existence through our art and writing, keeping alive the knowledge of their realm without allowing them direct access to ours. For a long moment, there was silence. Then slowly, the tree's branches bent in what seemed like a nod. Accepted, came the whispered response. But the connection remains. It cannot be broken, only redirected. We completed the ritual, sealing the new arrangement with drops of our mingled blood on the earth. When we opened our eyes, we were back in our living room, the candles burned down to stubs. Ellie sat up, no longer paralyzed. "Did it work?" she asked. That night, for the first time in months, Ellie slept without paralysis, and I saw no entities in my waking hours. But our connection has changed. We dream the same dreams now, visiting that other realm together in our sleep. We've become chroniclers of that world, painting and writing what we see there. Sometimes I wonder if we made the right choice. The bargain is still in effect, just in a different form. And sometimes, when I look at Ellie, I catch a glimpse of something else looking back at me through her eyes. The connection remains, and then I fear what might happen if one of us dies for real. I've always been a light sleeper, the kind who wakes at the slightest noise or change in light. That's why I thought the old Victorian house on Maple Street would be perfect. It sat back from the road, surrounded by ancient oak trees that muffled the sounds of the occasional passing car. The realtor called it a historical gem at an unbelievable price, which should have been my first warning. But I was too enchanted by the wraparound porch, the original hardwood floors, and the way sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows in the afternoon. After years of cramped apartment living, this house felt like a dream come true for a freelance writer like me. Space to breathe, room for a proper office, peace and quiet to work. The previous owners had been an elderly couple who moved to Florida to be closer to their grandchildren, or so my realtor told me. The house had been on the market for almost a year, which explained the surprisingly low asking price. Not many people want the upkeep of a Victorian these days, she explained with a practiced smile. I didn't question it further. I should have. The first few nights were uneventful. I was exhausted from moving, unpacking boxes until late, then falling into a dreamless sleep in my new bedroom on the second floor. I chose the smaller of the two upstairs bedrooms, drawn to its cozy dimensions, and the window seat overlooking the backyard. It was on the fifth night that it happened for the first time. I woke suddenly, the way you do when you sense someone watching you. The room was dark except for the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. I tried to sit up, to reach for my phone on the nightstand, but I couldn't move. Not my arms, not my legs, not even my fingers. It was as if my body had turned to stone while my mind remained painfully alert. And then I felt it, a weight on my chest pressing down, making it difficult to breathe. I strained my eyes, trying to see in the darkness, and that's when I made out the figure sitting on top of me. It was an old woman, impossibly old, with skin like crumpled paper and thin white hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore what looked like an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, the kind from the early 1900s with a starched white apron and cap. Her eyes were sunken deep into her skull, but I could feel them staring into mine. The weight increased, crushing my ribs, forcing what little air I had out of my lungs. I tried to scream, to move, to do anything, but I was completely paralyzed. Just when I thought I might suffocate, the pressure suddenly lifted. I gasped for air, my body finally responding to my commands, and sat bolt upright in bed. The room was empty. No old woman, no nurse. Just me, sweating and shaking in my antique four-poster bed. Sleep paralysis. That's what Google told me the next morning as I frantically searched for an explanation. A perfectly normal sleep disorder where your mind wakes before your body, often accompanied by hallucinations and a feeling of pressure on the chest. Nothing supernatural about it, just a misfiring brain caught between sleep and wakefulness. That explanation should have comforted me. Instead, it left me with a nagging sense of doubt. The old woman had seemed so real, so specific. Not some vague, shadowy figure, but a detailed person with a distinct appearance and clothing. Why would my brain conjure up an elderly nurse from a century ago? The next night, I left the bedside lamp on and took a sleeping pill, hoping to avoid another episode. It didn't help. Again, I woke paralyzed. Again, the old woman was sitting on my chest, her weight crushing me slowly. But this time she spoke, her voice like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "You sleep in her room," she whispered. leaning down until her face was inches from mine. "You sleep where they died." The paralysis broke suddenly, and I scrambled out of bed, turning on every light in the room. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. Who died in this room? What was she talking about? I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, I sat in my kitchen with a pot of coffee, waiting for dawn, trying to convince myself it was just a dream, just my imagination running wild in a new and unfamiliar house. The next day, I called my realtor and casually asked if she knew anything about the history of the house before the elderly couple owned it. "Not much," she admitted. "It was built in 1897 by a doctor named William Hargrove. I believe it changed hands several times over the years." "Why do you ask?" I mumbled something about researching the history for a writing project, and she seemed to accept that. After hanging up, I decided to visit the local historical society. If anyone would know about the house, they would. The historical society was housed in an old library building downtown, staffed by volunteers who seemed thrilled that someone was showing interest in local history. I spoke with an elderly man named Frank who perked up when I mentioned my address. "The old Hargrove house," he said, nodding. "Quite a history there. Dr. Hargrove built it for his wife, but she died in childbirth the year after they moved in. After that, he converted part of the house into a small private hospital for wealthy women suffering from what they called nervous conditions back then." He shuffled over to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder containing old photographs. One showed my house as it looked around 1900 with a small sign near the front door that read Hargrove Sanitarium for Ladies. The doctor had a nurse who worked with him, Frank continued, finding another photograph. His sister-in-law, Agatha Hargrove. She took over running the place after the doctor died in 1918 during the influenza pandemic. The photograph showed a severe-looking woman in a nurse's uniform, standing on the front porch of my house. She was younger in the picture, but I recognized her immediately. The same thin face, the same pulled-back hair, the same penetrating eyes that had stared into mine during my sleep paralysis. My mouth went dry. What happened to her? To Agatha? Frank's expression grew somber. There was quite a scandal in 1923. Several patients died unexpectedly under her care. There was an investigation, but nothing was ever proven. The sanitarium closed, and Agatha disappeared. Some said she moved away. Others thought she might have taken her own life. No one really knows. I left the Historical Society with copies of the photographs and a sick feeling in my stomach. The woman I'd seen sitting on my chest during my episodes of sleep paralysis was real, or had been real, a century ago. This wasn't just my imagination. Something was happening in that house, something connected to its dark history. That night, I slept in the downstairs living room on the couch. I told myself it was just to test my theory. If the sleep paralysis was connected to the upstairs bedroom, then sleeping elsewhere should prevent it. For once, I slept through the night, undisturbed. The next day, I began researching the house more thoroughly. I spent hours at the local library, going through old newspapers on microfilm. What I found chilled me to the bone. In April 1923, 3 women died within 2 weeks at the Hargrove Sanitarium. The newspaper reported that all 3 had been suffering from respiratory ailments, but a doctor who examined the bodies raised questions about the cause of death. He noted signs of suffocation, including petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes. Nurse Agatha Hargrove was questioned, but maintained that the women had died of natural causes. A 4th patient came forward, claiming that she had awakened one night to find Nurse Hargrove sitting on her chest, pressing down on her with a pillow. The woman had managed to cry out, alerting another patient who came to her aid. Agatha claimed the patient was delirious from her medication and had imagined the attack. The investigation stalled due to lack of evidence, but the sanitarium's reputation was ruined. It closed in May 1923, and Agatha Hargrove vanished. The last mention of her in the newspapers was a small item noting that her personal belongings had been left behind, and the authorities were seeking information on her whereabouts. That night, despite what I'd learned, I decided to sleep in my bedroom again. If Agatha, or her spirit, or whatever was manifesting in my house, was trying to communicate something, I needed to understand what it was. I placed a digital voice recorder on my nightstand and left a notebook and pen nearby, in case I was able to move enough to write something down. Then I got into bed, turned off the light, and waited. Sleep came eventually, and with it, the paralysis. I felt myself wake, felt the familiar inability to move, and then the weight on my chest as Agatha appeared, sitting on top of me as before. This time, I didn't fight it. Instead, I tried to communicate with her in my mind since I couldn't speak. "What do you want?" I thought, focusing on her sunken eyes. "Why are you here?" She leaned down, her face close to mine, her breath smelling of decay and antiseptic. "They're still here," she whispered. "In the walls, in the floor. I put them there. They cry at night. Can't you hear them crying?" The pressure on my chest increased, making it harder to breathe. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. "Where?" I managed to think. "Where are they?" "Behind the bookcase," she hissed. "My secret, my patients, the ones who saw too much, the ones who knew." The paralysis broke suddenly, and I sat up, gasping for air. The room was empty, but the temperature had dropped so much I could see my breath. The digital recorder was still running on my nightstand. With shaking hands, I stopped the recording and played it back. There was nothing but the sound of my breathing for the first few minutes. Then, faintly, a woman's voice. Behind the bookcase. My secret. I nearly dropped the recorder. It had recorded her voice. This wasn't in my head. This was real. The next morning, I examined every bookcase in the house. There were several in the living room, in what had been converted to my office, in the upstairs hallway. None of them seemed to hide any secret compartment or room. Was about to give up when I noticed something odd about the dimensions of the house. The upstairs hallway seemed shorter than it should be, given the size of the rooms on either side. There should have been more space between my bedroom and the bathroom at the end of the hall. In that section of hallway stood a small bookcase filled with old books left by the previous owners. I began removing the books, looking for any sign of a hidden mechanism. Nothing seemed unusual until I had emptied the entire bookcase. At the back of the bottom shelf, I noticed a small hole that might have once held a knob or handle. I inserted my finger and pulled. Nothing happened. I pushed instead and felt the back of the bookcase give slightly. Putting my shoulder against the empty bookcase, I pushed harder, and the entire unit swung inward like a door, revealing a narrow, dust-filled space beyond. It was a small room, no bigger than a large closet with no windows and a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. I found a light switch on the wall and flipped it, half expecting it not to work after all these years, but the bulb flickered to life, casting harsh shadows around the tiny room. The walls were lined with shelves containing old medical files and glass bottles of what must have been medications. A small desk stood against one wall, its surface covered with a thick layer of dust except for one spot, a rectangular clean area, as if something had been recently removed. With trembling hands, I began examining the medical files. They were patient records from the sanitarium, dating from 1918 to 1923. Most documented routine treatments for female hysteria, insomnia, and melancholia. But 5 files were different. These patients had all allegedly died of respiratory failure or pneumonia, all within a few months of each other in late 1922 and early 1923. The 3 women mentioned in the newspaper were there, but so were 2 others whose deaths hadn't been reported. According to the files, they had been transferred to another facility shortly before their deaths. But Agatha's handwritten notes told a different story. Patient became agitated and threatened to contact authorities. One note read, "Administered sedative and performed necessary procedure to ensure silence." Another, "Patient witnessed evening treatment of room 3. Cannot risk exposure. Procedure performed during night hours. Will report natural causes in morning." I felt sick. These weren't medical notes. They were confessions of murder. Agatha had killed these women to silence them, to cover up whatever treatments she had been performing at the sanitarium. But where were their bodies? Agatha had told me during my sleep paralysis that they were in the walls, in the floor. I looked around the small hidden room, noticing that the floorboards seemed newer than they should be, different from the original hardwood in the rest of the house. I didn't have the courage to tear up the floor that day. Instead, I took the files and went to the police station. I spoke with a detective, showing him what I'd found and explaining about the hidden room. I left out the part about my sleep paralysis and Agatha's ghost, saying instead that I'd noticed the dimensional discrepancy and gotten curious. The detective was skeptical but agreed to send someone to investigate. 2 days later, a team arrived with ground-penetrating radar. They scanned the floor of the hidden room and confirmed what I already knew. There were cavities beneath the floorboards, cavities the size and shape of human bodies. The investigation that followed made local headlines. They found the remains of 5 women buried beneath the floor of the hidden room, all showing signs of suffocation. Dental records and personal effects helped identify them as the missing patients from Agatha's files. They also found a 6th body, buried deeper than the others in what would have been the original flooring before the new boards were laid down. This body was identified through dental records as Agatha Hargrove herself. According to the medical examiner, she had died of a self-inflicted overdose of morphine, probably shortly after burying her last victim. I couldn't stay in the house after that. I put it up for sale, disclosing its history as required by law, and moved into a modern apartment building across town. The house sold eventually, to a couple who planned to renovate it extensively, including tearing down the walls of the hidden room and exorcising any lingering spirits. The sleep paralysis stopped as soon as I left the house. No more crushing, weight on my chest, no more visions of Agatha leaning over me in the darkness. But sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I think I can hear a faint whisper, like a voice carried on the wind from across town. They're free now, but I'm still here, always here. I don't know if Agatha was trying to confess her crimes through me, if some part of her wanted her victims to be found and properly laid to rest, or if she was simply reliving her murders night after night, trapped in an endless cycle of her own making. All I know is that some houses hold on to their secrets tightly, and sometimes those secrets find ways to make themselves known. The weight is gone from my chest now, but the memory of it lingers. And sometimes, when I pass by the old Victorian on Maple Street, I swear I can see a figure watching from the upstairs window, a thin woman in a nurse's uniform, waiting for someone new to hear her story. Thanks for staying with us until the very end. If you enjoyed tonight's chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that keep you up at night. Share your favorite part in the comments. We're always watching, and remember, at Nocturnal Narrative Studio, the night never truly ends.